But we do have to move on to Tottenham, who were, I think, undoubtedly had a much worse season than Liverpool, even though maybe both sets of fans were relatively disappointed. Also made a managerial change with Roberto De Zerbi coming in before the end of the season, ultimately doing enough to keep them in the Premier League. By the skin of their teeth, it should be added. But like Liverpool, they've made some big signings already. They've already spent €60 million on Jan-Paul van Hecke from Brighton, the central defender. Andy Robertson, who we discussed, obviously joined from Liverpool in a free transfer. And they actually picked up, going back to the Bournemouth connection, Marco Senese from Bournemouth, who's also a central defender. They've only made one departure so far, and that's obviously Yves Bissouma, the defensive midfielder, who departed on a free transfer. Now, we can get into the players they've been linked with because there is a remarkable number of players, and we'll get into that in a moment. But so far, if you're a Liverpool fan, if you're a Tottenham fan, would you be quite happy with the fact that the club have clearly realised after that last season that that backline needs completely ripped up and started again, which is evident from the fact they've signed 3 very proven Premier League defenders?
It's been pretty shrewd business so far, in my view, because you've got Robertson, who hugely experienced, great professional, on a free transfer. You've got Senese, who was brilliant for Bournemouth last season, on a free transfer. And you've got Van Hecke, who, in my book, was one of the best centre backs in the league last season. The price tag on Van Hecke, because he's got a year left in his deal, has also raised some eyebrows. But that's not really how football works. You've seen in recent seasons players go for big fees when they've only got 1 year left in their contract because clubs can sell them elsewhere. I think in the Brian and Boomo last summer, for example. I think their business so far has been really good. It seems that the Tottenham fan base has criticised obviously Daniel Levy's stewardship before he left last summer about the lack of investment, going out and really backing managers. I remember the season where Mitchell Pochettino, I think he got one signing in the summer after getting to the Champions League final. It's obviously caveated by the fact they were moving stadium, a lot of money's went into that, but Tottenham are a club who have the resources to go out and spend. And I think this is the summer where they will go and do that and look to be ambitious. It seems from the names being linked that they'll back Roberto De Zerbi very strongly in the market. Just look at the interest in Sandro Tonali and Matheus Fernandes, who are linked with clubs who are in Champions League football, like Manchester United, Arsenal. And so it seems like they want to compete at the top end of the transfer market and go out and get these players. The problem with that is they're not in Europe next season. So, how appealing is Tottenham if a bigger club per se come in?
Yeah, it's worth noting that Van Hecke was actually on our shortlist for Player of the Year in the defender category, so obviously very, very highly regarded here at Transfermarkt, and Tottenham obviously took a note of that, of course, and that's why they've obviously got out and spent the money. On the topic of players who could still come in, and you kind of touched on them, the most obvious links on the Tottenham rumour page are obviously Sandro Tonali from Newcastle, Matheus Fernandes from West Ham, Said Al-Mala again, the FC Cologne left winger, Malik Fofana from Lyon, and Joel Ordonez, who is the Ecuadorian defender, who we touched on actually on last week's episode with our colleagues in South America. They did a really good breakdown on his talents. And then some more attacking players like Savinho from Man City and Ibrahim Matza from Bayer Leverkusen. Of all those names, and it seems as though Sandro Tonali is the one that's really garnering a lot of interest, a lot of media speculation at this moment in time. I mean, he would be an outstanding signing for Tottenham, I think goes without saying, but maybe raised a few eyebrows the fact that he would swap Newcastle for Tottenham at this moment in time, especially considering he was linked with Manchester United, Barcelona and the likes not that long ago.
I always think it's so easy to kind of underestimate the appeal of London for players to live in. Just it's an incredible place to live, and so many players want to. That's respectfully to Newcastle is also a great city, but for especially for people coming from Italy and overseas, London has a huge appeal. But yeah, again, it would kind of raise my eyebrows. Certainly, he would choose to go to Tottenham, but ultimately, Tonali can only choose to go to a club who bid what Newcastle want for him. And if Tottenham are the only club willing to do that, he's always been linked with Arsenal, but I don't think they'll pay what Newcastle want. So it could come down to where his options this summer are, staying at Newcastle or going to Tottenham, so he might fancy the change because, let's be honest, teams outside of England unless it's Bayern Munich or PSG, won't be able to afford Sandro Tonali. So there's no chance of him going back to Italy per se. So it's kind of limited the clubs he can go to. And if Tottenham can offer the financial package, then it could be a real option.
Yeah, it seems as though he's been on the look for a departure from Newcastle for a while now. And as you said, if no one else is going to put an offer in, then Tottenham are quite right to come in and make those offers. Just on the topic of players who might be moved on, Ewan, to potentially finance a Tonali deal and signing from other players, there's a lot of young players in that squad who have been linked with moves. Mathias Tel, for example, has been linked a lot to by a lot of clubs actually. Lille, Frankfurt, Bournemouth. Lucas Bergvall, who you did a piece on Monday, linked with Nottingham Forest. I think Borussia Dortmund, Bayern Munich. You can jump into that in a moment. And there's obviously Luka Vuskovic, who's a really highly rated central defender who's returning from Hamburg. And there's a lot of speculation over his future due to the fact that, Tottenham just picked up a new central defender. In fact, they picked up two, of course, in this transfer window. Now, in stark contrast, maybe to Areola, and feel free to disagree with me here, I do feel like De Zerbi does tend to put his foot down at clubs when it comes to transfers and players that he wants to sign. Do you think this is Tottenham maybe just clearing house and saying, thanks Bergvall, thanks Tell, you guys have been great, but you're not good enough. We need to move them on. Or do you think this is De Zerbi saying, no, I need ready-made players to do what the fans expect of us next season, and unfortunately that means if we have to cash in guys like Mathias Tel, Bergvall, and perhaps most notably Vuskovic, that's just the price of doing business.
Probably a bit of both. Certainly right. De Zerbi's not shy. He's quite confrontational. He's had fallouts with boards before, so I don't think he'll be. And also, he took the job at a really weird stage of the season with 6 Premier League games to go. He'd have been made massive promises that he would get back in the summer and he'd have control in the transfer market. So he will have a major say in what's going on. I think he'll be driving everything at the football club. In terms of Vuskovic, you know far more about him than me. He's been a kind of avid watcher of the Bundesliga. To me, it seems really strange that they move him on. He seems like a really good young talent. Rave reviews at Hamburg last season. But like you mentioned, they've got so many centre backs now with the arrival of Senese and Van Hecke. The expectation will be that Christian Romero will go this summer. They'll also be interested in Mickey van de Veen. So that kind of covers that area, but maybe they think, well, we can make a big profit in the Vuskovic and we can, PSR, etc. That helps us go out and sign players. It's probably the same with Bergvall. He didn't start a single game under De Zerbi last season. He was an unused substitute the last 2 games of the season. He's a 20-year-old that came to the club with huge expectation that he could develop into a world-class midfield player. He'd had trials at Bayern Munich, Manchester United. There was huge excitement when Tottenham acquired him. It was viewed as a major coup. It's not quite worked out for him. I personally believe that he's a immense talent still and could become a leading midfielder, but it looks like he's told Tottenham he wants to go. And with no European football next season, there's going to be less games for him to play. So it makes sense if De Zerbi doesn't fancy him for him to go out. If he could get a move to somewhere like Borussia Dortmund, I think that would be the perfect place for him to develop. They are one of, if not the best clubs in the top 5 leagues for developing young players. You've seen it with players that went from England over there in the past, Jude Bellingham, Jadon Sancho. There's been so many players who have really prospered at Dortmund. The problem with that is I think Tottenham want 52 million euros. Dortmund's record signings Dembele at 35 million euros, so that's not going to work out. That'd be the perfect place for him to go. And like players like Tell, it'll just come down to whether De Zerbi thinks they're good enough. Because they do have quite a lot of young, talented players. So obviously, if you move them on, it's PSR, it's good. So yeah, it'd be interesting. I think they'll do a lot of business this summer. I read something earlier about them wanting to do 8 permanent signings still. So a really busy summer at Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, it's also maybe worth adding before we wrap up that they've also had a kind of real changeover in terms of sporting directors, technical directors, and people running the recruitment department. So while on paper it's great when clubs have these young players, in many cases they could be young players who were rated by the kind of previous regime. And then, when someone else comes in to take over that job, they say, well, let's just try and cash in on them, which might be the case with the likes of Bergvall, for example, or Vuskovic. But yeah, Ewan, it's both going to be really interesting to see how they both do in this summer transfer window. And then, of course, in the Premier League coming up. But put you on the spot before we wrap up here. And I know there's still a lot of business to be done in the summer, but out of the two clubs, which one have you been most impressed with so far?
Oh, it's difficult to say because I don't know too much about Munoz. I'll put my hands up and say that. I've watched Jackie quite a lot in League One. I like what Tottenham are doing, just in terms of picking up two Premier League proven players in a free transfer. Van Hecke, excellent at Brighton last season. I think it had a really good start to the window. I think Liverpool obviously finish ahead of Tottenham in the table next season. I'm interested to see how Iraola gets on at Liverpool because he's never coached in European football before. So he's never had to juggle midweeks to the Premier League. His style of play is so intense. I'll be interested to see how the players cope with that. Also how Liverpool players cope with those demands. But overall, I'll say better start to the summer so far. It's got to be Tottenham.